Good day and welcome to UkrLive TV. My name is Sergey Alushkin and I am honored to introduce you to Professor James Armstead. He is right now on the Skype call from the sunny Ohio. Good day.
Good day, Sergey. How are you?
Everything's fine, thank you. So we are here to discuss our recent changes in Ukrainian politics. As you know, we have elected Volodymyr Zelensky as our president. And what is the actual opinion in the United States and especially, of course, due to your expertise in the international law, how would you evaluate our Ukrainians' choice?
Well, the first part of your question, how the United States is assessing Volodymyr Zelensky, I think it's too early a real good feeling about the new administration, about the new president, his policies, after only 2 weeks. I think people here are surprised at the election. And Poroshenko, whether you or not, he's a known quantity. We know how he deals with the international questions. We know how he has been addressing the economic crisis in Ukraine. And of course, the corruption issue, which is all important for foreign nations in dealing with Ukraine, it's of great concern. Now, the expectations for Zelensky are very high. He has we would say, a high bar to cover. He has said, I think, many of my own opinion, many of the right things. He has the first day he talked about foreign policy, about corruption, about the kind of people he wanted to appoint to his ministries. I think all of that's very good. As a lawyer and a political scientist, I am impressed that he has acted in this first 2 weeks like a seasoned politician. He is an actor, a director, a comedian, a businessman. He has a degree in law, but he never practiced. He has not been involved in politics in a formal sense, so one would not expect someone of this stature to come into office very strong on the first day, but he has. He said the right things. Now, of course, what does he do? We have to see that he puts actions behind these words, but personally, I am very impressed. I would give him an A for his grade for the first 2 weeks.
All right.
Next month, who knows?
How about his decision to appoint elections before the schedule?
Well, I think that I have been involved in all the elections in the last 5 years until this last one as a OSCE observer. And I think the elections themselves were run very well. They were very honest, in many ways, more honest than the elections here in the United States. And we have a long experience, 200 years of elections. Of course, maybe that means we know how to cheat better. I don't know. But I think the elections have been very honest. As an OSCE observer, I am only an observer. I am not a referee. In the Ukraine, it's the only country I have been to where election officials, when there's a problem, they would tell me about the problem and ask my opinion. And I would have to say, I can't give you an opinion because I'm not a referee. I'm only an observer. I write about and I make reports. But I have looked at your election code, and I think if you follow the code, you will be okay. And the officials always did what they were supposed to do. This was not true in Belarus. This was not true in Kyrgyzstan. It was not true in Kazakhstan. It was only true for me, it was only true in this. I would have to be enthusiastic about an honest election, and there's an appreciation of democracy. So I thought that was wonderful. Now, why call an early election? I think there are two things on Zelensky's mind, because he doesn't tell us. I think the first one, he is concerned about corruption in the process, and he wants to put his own stamp on the Ukraine. It is one thing to be president. It is another to have control of the multiple parties you have. See, we have a two-party system. It's very simple. The president either has the Congress, both houses in the same party, or he doesn't. In a multi-party system, you have coalition government. So if there is a change of president and you have elected this man by almost by 70%, this is what we call a landslide, we would say in English. This is a tremendous change, a sea change in the Ukraine. So now I think what he wants is the people to have a review of the coalition of parties to determine, do they want to send him a parliament that's going to support his changes? He cannot do this alone. The economy has to be dealt with. Donbass has to be dealt with. The issue has to be dealt with. He has to change the law. He has to change the policy. He needs a prime minister. He needs the ministers of state. He needs the parliamentarians to, if not a majority of his own people who agree with him on everything, at least a coalition that wants to help him govern in a way that makes sense for the people of Ukraine. So I think it's good. Mm-hmm. And I plan to be there.
What can you say about the speech of Zelensky during his inauguration about the use of Budapest Memorandum in the solving of the Ukrainian war conflict?
Well, of course, as you know, I am very interested in the Budapest Memorandum, and as an international lawyer, I believe international agreements are extremely important. They don't solve the problems, but they give you a framework in which to discuss them. The Budapest Memorandum is extremely important for the Ukraine because it guarantees your border. The United States has signed it, Britain has signed it, France has signed it, and perhaps more importantly, Russia signed it. They have not lived up to their agreement to protect the borders. That Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons, and in many ways, that was the quid pro quo. We didn't say that. Give up the weapons, we leave your borders alone. But essentially, Ukraine stepped up to the plate and became a strong, important international nation by attesting that it was for peace and it was against nuclear proliferation. And it's one of the few nations that have, with Libya, South Africa, and the Ukraine, are the only nations to voluntarily give up nuclear weapons. And the agreement by the international community, since you were a newly independent nation, is that your borders would be protected. They have not been. The United States failed you. Britain has failed you. France has failed you. And more important, your neighbor to the east has failed you. And these borders were not protected. Now, I understand there are other issues of history. The Ukraine was part of Russia for a long time, but since 1957, it was recognized as part of Ukraine. And Crimea it should not be the thing that ruins the modern Ukraine. Ukraine is a wonderful country. You have the potential for a tremendous economy. You have great agricultural interests. Your newly developing industries are beginning to do well. I worked with students, not only law students, when I taught in Odessa, but I worked with engineering and science students and talked to them about what they wanted to do. I even talked to high school students. When I was in Kiev, I went to several high schools, and the students told me they wanted a change. They wanted a better economy. They wanted to be more European. They wanted European integration with all of these things to increase opportunities. That can't happen if you're fighting this long-term continuous war in Donbass. If the international territory is not respected, and we have agreements for this in international law since 1649 with the Peace of Westphalia. So it's not just the Budapest Memorandum. This is international law for centuries. So this is wrong. It needs to be addressed.
How about the word security assurances? It's just like they have just assured that you will have the security, but not somehow guaranteed it. It's often the part of speculations behind the Budapest Memorandum that it actually has no obligations on the United States, France, Britain, and Russia.
Well, in effect, it hasn't had any serious implications because we haven't. If there has been no serious open international discussions that Russia has violated Ukraine territorial integrity by seizing Crimea. That needs to happen. It needs to be a large international conference. But I think we have to look at the larger security picture. The EU 10 years ago began discussions, serious discussions, I think, at looking at integration, economic integration into the EU. And before that can happen, in my opinion, before that can happen seriously, there has to be integration into NATO. If Ukraine isn't protected, then joining the International Economic Union really doesn't make any sense. The Western powers, I think, have looked at the Ukraine and said, yes, we will take you. You may join the EU, you may join NATO, but you have to solve this border problem. The Russians saw that and saw Ukraine moving west and decided if we're going to get what we want, and what they really want was the protection, I think, of the base of the Black Sea Fleet. So to ensure that would happen, even though they had released, they said, we'll seize it now. Then if you join NATO, it doesn't matter. So they were looking at a realpolitik game, and very much like Bismarck would have looked at creating Germany. If we make Russia larger and seize this portion, then it doesn't matter what happens with the Ukraine afterwards. Join NATO, we don't care. Join the EU, we don't care. We have what we want to protect the interests. Now, why do the Russians look at this way? I don't think Turkey by itself or NATO or Ukraine is going to attack Russia. You're going to seize Black Sea Russia. I don't think anybody wants that. I mean, unless you are, is there a shortage of Black Sea monsters in the Ukraine? You need more of these crustaceans to feed people? I don't think so. In many ways, the Russians are insecure. Russia has 9 time zones, 355 million people, but an economy the size of Italy. The only reason they want the more control in the Black Sea, more control over the Ukraine, is this insecurity because before, as the Soviet Union, they were an important nation. They could threaten other countries. African and Asian countries respected them because they supported socialist movements. They had a great deal of Central Asia. Now, even though physically the largest nation on earth, there's an insecurity because they are not respected. Their economy is not safe and secure. It's not growing. The oligarchs are getting rich, but the Russian people are actually very poor. When one gets ready to retire, when you make a lot of money, a station, you become, well, you're an important journalist now, but you become world famous. When you think about doing something with your money, do you want a dacha in Russia? Do you want to buy a ZIL? Do you want to take a vacation in Siberia? No. You want to go other places. You want a German car. You want a South American girlfriend. You want an island in the Caribbean. So they are worried about their position. And Putin, in many ways, maybe it's because he's a short man. I don't know. Like Napoleon, he's concerned about his stature, his country's stature. And unfortunately, Ukraine is paying the price because the allies won't step up to the plate.
And speaking about allies, the Ukraine actually had some opportunity to join NATO, but it was blocked from the Western side because of fears to not provoke Russia. I guess it was even
yes.
in mid 2000s years. How you can comment it?
I think the allies want you to join. They are willing to take you. They're not enthusiastic. They're willing to take Ukraine, but they want to take you without the war. It's you solve Donbass, yes, come into NATO. Well, the answer to that is in many ways we are not acting with respect for the Ukrainian people or with due regard for our international obligations if we are not going to protect Ukraine and offer assistance with the defense of Donbass and with the negotiations to deal we're going to do with Crimea, then what does it mean NATO? Are there 2 classes of NATO citizens? They're the original countries, the original 13, they get all the protections, but the new countries, well, we'll protect you if it's convenient. This is not how an international organization must work. If we're going to make rules, we're going to have international law, we're going to rest our security on an international collective security structure, then every nation and every citizen in those nations must believe that an attack upon one is an attack upon all. That is Article 4 of the charter with NATO. Does it mean anything if we let Ukraine in and say, yes, you can come in, but Donbass is your own problem? So we have minds, and NATO doesn't know how to deal with this. Now, NATO has its own problems, of course. I was on the teams that helped negotiate Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Montenegro, Hungary, and the Czech Republic and Albania into NATO. And one of the things that those countries were concerned with is Article 4. Does it mean it applies to us the same as the original nations in 1949? Now, I think I can say this now because it's been so long. When negotiating with Poland, privately, the Poles asked always, what Ukraine? We are very close to Ukraine. We have, if not formal bilateral relationships, we have an understanding. And my answer always, well, I can't answer that as a negotiator. That's between the heads of state. But I don't think if you decide you're going to assist Ukraine in her defense, that anyone in NATO will complain. If you have a bilateral relationship, but that's for you to decide as two independent nations bilaterally. That's not a NATO question. And of course, this is in 98, 99, before the Crimean problem came into existence, before the Donbass problem came into existence. You know, in many ways, Russia has made a mistake in her own interest. Stalin removed thousands of Ukrainian citizens to Siberia. He brought in industry and tried to Russify the eastern portion of the Ukraine to make it more loyal to the Soviet Union. Well, what that has done in many ways, it slowed down the economy long term, because the industry he put into that part of Ukraine in many ways is still the same industry. So when you join the common market, what they make in Donbass are old-fashioned Russian refrigerators, where you're not going to sell those to Germans who would rather buy modern Krupp refrigerators. So that area needs new industry, it needs new blood. So what Putin took is, in many ways, we would say he took your Social Security and retirement system. There are lots of older Russian workers there. Yes, they are Russian. And when Putin talks about the referendum and people in the Crimea, for example, voting to join Russia, I believe that's probably true, that the elections probably were okay in terms of cheating on the election. Now, many Ukrainian passport holders didn't go to the polls because it was dangerous. So they didn't go. The Russian speakers with their passports went to the polls, voted overwhelmingly. And of course, it's easy to vote to stay in Russia when there is a Russian army there protecting that point of view. But perhaps something could have been worked out. If we could go back to 2005, and for a few minutes, you make me God. My grandson would agree with this because I would give him more money. But for a few minutes, what I would say is, look, if there's a majority of Russian citizens in a part of this area, and Ukraine freely decides to give up this area, pay for it. Maybe 10 years of oil and gas come into the Ukrainian economy from Russia to cover, because we're talking 20 in Donbass, we're talking 20 to 30 miles of that 40 kilometers wide of the Ukraine and about 150 kilometers long. It's not a very piece of the country, and in many ways, it's not all that important to the economy. Now, the Crimea is a different story because, of course, the ports, Sevastopol, is more important. That's a different area. But at least for Donbass, some arrangement could have been worked out. An independent autonomous region or some joint citizenship for the people. There is always a way negotiate a settlement, taking someone else's country. It was illegal in 1649. It is illegal in 1991 after Budapest. It's illegal today. That must be addressed by the World Court. That issue with the Ukraine, that has to be addressed. Donbass probably can be worked out diplomatic, but as your new president, President Zelensky, says, I think very wisely, that's probably impossible with in office, that we will have to wait till he's on. Now, what he declares himself czar in 5 years and doesn't have another election, I don't know. But he's got a very big plate, and I hope his teeth are good.
There were recently some discussions in Ukraine about the UN peacekeepers to involve them into Donbass. How do you think, is it even possible right now, or does it even make sense?
Well, of course, Russia has the power of veto on the Security Council, so that would make it very difficult to put UN peacekeepers there. But if the Ukraine joins NATO, NATO peacekeepers could be put there, and then they could apply for a UN sanction before the General Assembly. Mm-hmm. The General Assembly could vote to support it, and at that point you have a constitutional problem. The General Assembly requesting support for a NATO mission for peacekeeping, and the Russians wanting to veto it. So it would look very bad in the internet community. Now, I travel and work in other places in the world, and in many places, people don't understand what's going on in the Ukraine. You know, for 60 years, the German-Czech-Hungarian border, that was the crossroads of East and West. That was the crossroads between what we call euphemistically in those days, the communist world and the free world. And tyranny and democracy, all of those things we ascribe to the border there. Well, now that border has moved east. The Ukraine is on the frontier of democracy and freedom and open government. But we're not treating the Ukraine the way we treated Germany. No one is rushing to send forces to defend the Ukraine. No one is rushing to send economic aid to the Ukraine. And unfortunately, given the economic conditions, the corruption issues, we're not even getting private industry and private banking willing to put money in to make the Ukraine strong. The Ukraine can be a very strong, productive nation. The people are well educated. You have many good universities. I lectured, I think, at 6 or 7 of the universities while I was teaching in Odessa. I traveled and talked to other schools. I was very impressed with the students, with the faculty, and with the willingness of the people to change. I wasn't impressed with the effectiveness of government. And I'm hoping Zelensky is willing to make the change. So maybe having a man who is not a politician and steep in that old system is a good thing. And after all, I have to believe in him. He's a lawyer.
How do you think, does the meeting of Zelensky and Trump will somehow improve relations between the US and Ukraine?
Well, I think there's a possibility, but you must understand this president in the United States is an internationalist. In many ways, he is a populist. He's very much like Putin in the sense that he's not impressed with international organizations. He feels that if you have agreements with your neighbors, you give up sovereignty, and that sovereignty is the most important thing. The vote 2 weeks ago on the EU, the European Union, the Parliament, the young people in Western Europe did not turn out. There were less than 40% of them turned out for the votes. Now, older people voted. And this surprises me, and in some ways it worries me, because Europe has 1,000 years of integration. Since Catholicism moved, in 1000, Catholicism was introduced into Poland. So now it goes all the way from the Irish, the west of Ireland, to the east of Poland. You have Catholicism. So that's the beginning of religious integration and later cultural integration. Well, that did not stop. The countries knew of each other, but it didn't stop the competition. And there was almost continuous war in Europe from 1000 until 1945. One of the things that the EU did, I think NATO is very very strong, and it gave breathing space to Europe after the Second World War to begin to talk about political integration. Before, we had economic integration, we had religious integration. We did not have political integration. Napoleon tried, but he wanted to do it with force. The EU that grew out of the steel and coal union of 1953 between Germany and France, that was a peaceful extension of the economy because it was recognized that the countries were so close, they shared rivers, they shared natural resources, and they shared the same problems. They had to find a way to integrate first the economy, then the politics, so that then the possibility of war was reduced. If we do away with organizations like the EU, like NATO, I think we go back to this fierce competition where nations want to be independent, they want to be stronger, and you look at the populist movements now in Poland, in Hungary, in the Czech Republic, the Brexit movement in England, and the right-wing France with the Le Pen government. Marie Le Pen was recently in Russia visiting Putin. So isn't it interesting? What would you say if you lived 100 years ago that the far right in France would be talking to an ex-communist in Russia, that they would be allies? I mean, this makes no sense when one wants to look at long-term stability. First, to have security, you must have stability. That's what NATO gave Europe, stability, so that you could have the security. NATO didn't give security, it gave stability. The EU provides the security because people believe they are safe and they have an economy that's growing and they can see that there's a future for themselves. That's what we have to get for Ukraine.
And for the last question, are there any hopes or perspectives for Ukraine's next 5 years to somehow join the EU or NATO?
Absolutely. I think as Ukrainian business goes, and Ukraine is very technically oriented, we call the STEM program, we push STEM in our educational system, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. The Ukraine is developing a large technological base. They're beginning to develop a larger industrial base. That combined with the tremendous potential for your agricultural sector makes the Ukraine a very attractive target for banking, for foreign investment, all of which is needed to grow the economy. As the economy grows, I see the Ukrainian people and the people of Central and Western Europe wanting Ukraine as part of that community and wanting you in the EU. That gets you into NATO. And I think that's the ultimate solutions. The Russians aren't going to like that. And as I tell my friends in Israel and Lebanon, live in a tough neighborhood. Well, you live in a tough neighborhood because you have a very big neighbor that's insecure. There is nothing in Ukraine that taking the Crimea or making Ukraine a hegemonic vassal state of Russia that would help them. It doesn't do anything for them. They have enough land. They're the largest landmass in the world. They have 9 time zones. Would somehow having the Ukraine make Russia better, stronger? I don't think so. It's their insecurity. Now, we have to give them assurances that they're secure. No one wants to attack Russia. I have been a military officer all of my adult life, first as a professional, then as a reservist, while an academic studying this problem. I don't know of anyone that's written a scenario, let's attack Russia. It was always defense. I mean, what do we need? More snow? I mean, what are you going to get if you attack? More of the Arctic Circle? It doesn't make any sort of sense. What Russia needs is not more land. What they need is more money, more investment. Well, they've closed themselves off because of their oligarchy. So you're not going to invest in Russia when it's going to be taken. The money would be taken by some oligarch. And if you don't give the money to the people and spread it out and make the economy better, you will never make that country more stable. Hence, the leadership of the country will be insecure because they don't trust their own people who are poor and not improving. They don't trust their neighbors because they are jealous of what goes on there. And I think in many ways, Russia is jealous of the Ukraine. That the West wants Ukraine, and I think Ukraine wants to be Western.
Well, thank you, Professor. It was a pleasure meeting you, of course, online, and I hope that won't be our last meeting, and we will call you maybe some time later. And as for you, just stay tuned to Ukr Live TV. Thank you.